The gate slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the snow. The wind roared across the hilltop, cruel and sharp, cutting through skin and bone. And there, just outside those iron bars worth more than most homes in the city, stood a small black boy with no shoes on his feet. His toes were red and raw against the ice. His coat was too thin. His hands trembled so badly he could barely hold them together. He looked so small against the towering mansion behind him, so small against the world. "Please," he had said only a second before. His voice was weak but polite. "Sir, I just need somewhere warm. Just for a little bit." But warmth was not something the man inside that mansion gave freely. Inside stood a self-made millionaire, a man who had built towers of glass and steel from nothing but hustle and cold focus. He had grown up poor. He had slept in cars. He had fought for every dollar. And somewhere along the way, his heart had turned into something solid, something guarded, something that did not bend. "I don't run a shelter," he said flatly, adjusting the cuff of his silk shirt. He didn't even look directly at the child. His security team stood stiff, waiting for the next command. The house manager, an older woman who had worked there for years, shifted uncomfortably. But nobody challenged him. Nobody ever did. The boy had knocked on the gate after walking through the storm alone. Snow clung to his short curls. His cheeks were wet from tears that froze almost as soon as they fell. He had said he lost his mother in the city crowd when the storm hit. He had said he didn't know where to go. He had said he was cold. But the millionaire didn't ask more questions. Questions led to responsibility. Responsibility led to risk. And risk was something he had trained himself to avoid. "We can't let strangers in," he continued. "Not in this neighborhood. Not on this property." The words were calm, clean, controlled. But outside, the wind was wild. The security guard gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You gotta move along, kid," he muttered, almost apologetic. The boy nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just looked at the mansion one last time, at the glowing windows, at the warmth he could almost feel through the glass. Then the gates closed. The sound echoed down the hill. The boy stood there for a moment, as if waiting for someone to change their mind, waiting for a voice to call him back. But none came. The storm swallowed everything. His small frame shook harder now. His breathing came out in short white clouds. Inside the mansion, music played softly from hidden speakers. A fireplace crackled. Crystal glasses clinked as the millionaire poured himself a drink. He walked toward the tall living room windows without thinking. Just another habit. Just another glance at the city he owned pieces of. That's when he saw him. Through the frosted glass, barely visible against the white swirl of snow, the boy stumbled. It happened slowly. 1 second he was standing. The next his knees buckled. His hands reached out for balance but caught nothing. And then his small body disappeared into the snow. The millionaire froze. For a second, he told himself the child was just kneeling, just resting. Kids were dramatic. Kids bounce back. That's what he used to do. But the boy didn't move. The wind covered him quickly, as if trying to erase the evidence. The house manager stepped closer to the window. "Sir," she whispered, her voice tight. "He's not getting up." Silence filled the room. Heavy, thick, louder than the storm outside. The millionaire's jaw tightened. His mind raced through excuses. "It's not my fault. His parents should be watching him. The city has shelters. This isn't my responsibility." But deep inside, somewhere buried under years of deals and defenses, something stirred. A memory. A younger version of himself. 10 years old. Standing outside a grocery store in worn-out shoes during winter. Watching other families walk past him like he was invisible. Feeling what it meant to be small. To be cold. To be ignored. He blinked hard, pushing the image away. "I told you," he said, though his voice wasn't steady now. "We can't let everyone in." Outside, one of the security guards shifted nervously. He looked back at the mansion, waiting for new instructions. Snow was building up around the boy's still body. The millionaire's hand tightened around his glass. Ice cubes clinked sharply. "Sir," the house manager said again, softer this time. "He's just a child. Just a child." The words echoed in the marble room. The millionaire turned away from the window, pacing across the polished floor. Each step felt heavier than it should. He prided himself on being decisive, strong, unshaken. That was how he survived boardrooms and backroom deals. That was how he earned respect. Compassion, he believed, made you weak. But why did his chest feel tight? He walked back to the window before he could stop himself. The snow was thicker now. The boy's small shape was barely visible. For the first time in years, the millionaire didn't feel powerful. He felt unsure. The wind outside howled again, rattling the glass. The mansion, built to withstand storms, stood tall and unmoved. But inside, something had shifted. The millionaire placed his palm against the cold window. The glass separated him from the storm, from the boy, from the choice in front of him. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. And still, the child did not move. The room, once warm and glowing, now felt strangely silent. Even the fireplace seemed quieter. The staff stood frozen, watching their boss, waiting to see which man would speak next, the cold businessman or the human being. The millionaire swallowed. Outside, the snow kept falling. And inside that mansion of marble and pride, a battle had just begun, one that no amount of money could easily win. The millionaire paced across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing through the silent living room. Back and forth, back and forth. Each step sharp, restless, uneven. He tried to focus on anything else. The city lights beyond the storm, the warmth of the fireplace, the quiet music still playing somewhere in the house. But the image wouldn't leave him. A small boy, falling into the snow, not getting up. It's not my problem, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. I can't save everyone. The words sounded firm when he said them, but they didn't feel firm anymore. They felt hollow, thin. His assistant stood a few feet away, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had worked for him long enough to know when to stay silent, when to disappear, when not to speak at all. But tonight was different. Her voice came out soft, almost fragile. Sir, he's just a child. The millionaire stopped pacing. Just a child. Those 3 words seemed to hang in the air, heavy as stone. He didn't answer. He just turned slowly toward the window again, staring out into the storm. Outside, the snow fell harder now, the wind sweeping it sideways in long white sheets. The security guard stood near the gate, their dark coats covered in frost. One of them shifted his weight from foot to foot, glancing nervously at the small shape lying in the snow. Even from this distance, it was clear the boy still wasn't moving. Inside, the millionaire felt something twist in his chest. A feeling he didn't like. A feeling he didn't recognize right away. Guilt. He clenched his jaw, tried to push it down, tried to bury it under logic and habit and the rules he had lived by for decades. This is how the world works, he told himself. You survive by being strong. You survive by protecting what's yours. You don't open the door to every stranger who knocks. That's what he had learned growing up. And suddenly, without warning, the past came rushing back. A freezing night long ago, a younger version of himself, standing under a broken streetlight, wearing a coat too thin for winter, his stomach empty, his hands shaking. He remembered knocking on a door once, just like that boy had done tonight. He remembered the way the man inside looked at him, not with anger, not with kindness, but with indifference, like he wasn't even there. The door had closed slowly, quietly, final. He blinked hard, shaking the memory away, but it clung to him like the cold. Somewhere along the way, he had promised himself he would never feel that powerless again, never be the one begging, never be the one left outside. And he had kept that promise. He built companies. He made millions. He surrounded himself with walls, gates, guards, contracts, and control. He built a life where nothing could touch him. But now, standing in that warm room, watching a child lie in the snow, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt small. Call an ambulance, he said suddenly, his voice sharp, almost angry, as if he were arguing with the room itself. His assistant nodded quickly and hurried away, relief and urgency in her steps. But the millionaire didn't move. He stayed by the window, his hand resting against the cold glass, watching the storm swallow the world outside. The glass separating him from that child was thick, imported, expensive, worth more than most people made in a year, and yet it felt paper thin. Minutes passed, stretching longer and longer. The storm roared. The guards outside bent against the wind. Their voices faint on the radios clipped to their shoulders. Then the radio on the security desk inside crackled to life. A voice came through, tense and strained. "Sir, we need assistance at the gate." The millionaire's head lifted slightly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady, but his fingers tightened against a window frame. There was a pause. Wind howled through the static. Then the guard's voice came back, lower now. "Urgent. Sir, the boy isn't breathing properly." The words hit like a hammer. For a moment, the millionaire didn't react. It was as if his mind refused to process what he had just heard. Not breathing properly. The phrase echoed again and again, louder each time. His hand began to tremble. He looked down at it, almost surprised, as if it belonged to someone else. This was the same hand that had signed contracts worth millions without shaking. The same hand that had pointed at rivals and ended careers with a single decision. But now it trembled because of one small boy in the snow. He felt something crack inside him, not loud, not sudden, but deep and quiet, like ice breaking under pressure. For years, he had believed he controlled everything. Markets, people, outcomes. Time itself seemed to bend to his schedules, his deadlines, his demands. But now, standing there, he realized something terrifying. Time was moving, and he couldn't stop it. Every second the boy lay in that snow was a second that could never be taken back. Every second was a step closer to something permanent, something irreversible. And suddenly, all his wealth felt meaningless. What good were millions of dollars if they couldn't buy one extra minute for a freezing child? What good were mansions and gates if they turned into walls between life and death? The storm outside seemed louder now, as if the world itself were shouting at him. Behind him, the house was silent. The staff watched from a distance, their faces tense, uncertain. They had never seen him like this before. Never seen hesitation in his eyes. Never seen doubt. The radio crackled again, the guard's voice sharper this time. "Sir, we need to move fast." Move fast. The millionaire's heart began to pound, heavy and uneven, echoing in his ears. He looked at the door, leading outside, just a few steps away, just a few seconds. But those steps felt heavier than anything he had ever carried, because he knew, deep down, that once he walked through that door, something would change. Not just for the boy, for him. And for the first time in years, the man who feared nothing was afraid of what that change might mean. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just ran. Out the front door, through the marble foyer, past the silent staff frozen in shock, past the security guards who instinctively reached for him. He ran into the storm. The snow hit his face immediately, a cold, stinging slap that made his eyes water, but he didn't stop. There was no coat, no umbrella, no preparation for what he was about to do. Only instinct. Only the image of the boy lie in the snow, so small, so fragile, that he felt like the ground itself was shaking under the weight of responsibility. Every step was heavy, though the adrenaline made him fly. The wind tore at his skin. Snow clung to his hair and eyelashes. His hands burned as he pushed forward, but he didn't slow down. Not once. He didn't even notice the cameras mounted on the gates or the security guards shouting behind him. Their voices were swallowed by the wind. Only the boy mattered. When he reached the edge of the driveway, he saw him clearly. The small body crumpled against the ice, the snow already starting to bury him in its cold white sheets. The boy's lips moved, barely forming the sound, barely audible above the roar of the storm. "Mama, Mama," he whispered again and again. That one word shattered him, cut through every layer of pride, every shield he had built around himself. He dropped to his knees, feeling the snow soak through his dress shoes, freezing his skin instantly. He placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, shook him gently, willing life back into his tiny frame. And then he scooped him up, clutching him to his chest as if the warmth of his own body could fight off the storm. The boy's small arms hung limply over his shoulders, his head lolled back, his breathing shallow and ragged. He screamed for blankets, for heat, for anyone inside to help. ignoring the flashing lights of the cameras, ignoring the guards, ignoring every image he had spent decades protecting. He felt his carefully constructed world collapse around him. Money meant nothing. Titles meant nothing. Power meant nothing. All that mattered was the soft weight of this small human in his arms, the life he might lose in a single moment of delay. He raced back toward the house, snow clinging to his clothes, the wind battering his face, his lungs burning from the cold and from fear. He slammed open the door, shocking everyone inside. The house manager, the assistant, the guards. They all froze, staring at him with wide eyes as he carried the boy past them. He threw him onto a waiting blanket, stripped off his own coat to wrap around the trembling child, and yelled for hot water, towels, anything to warm him. Time stretched into eternity as he worked, shivering himself, praying silently, unable to stop, unable to wait, unable to imagine life without the boy in it. Minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They rushed in, efficient and calm in ways he could barely comprehend, and immediately began assessing the child. The millionaire watched, his chest tight, sweat mixing with snow, fingers twitching, body trembling not from the cold but from the sharp, raw realization of how close he had come to losing him. He stood there, soaked to the bone, feeling every heartbeat in his chest, each second stretching longer than the last. The doctor looked at him quietly, the words slow, deliberate, cutting through the storm and into him. Another 10 minutes and he wouldn't have made it. 10 minutes. 10 small, frozen minutes could have ended everything. His heart pounded harder than any deal he had ever closed, harder than any victory he had ever celebrated. 10 minutes. That was the difference between life and death. And he had waited too long to act. He sank to the edge of the gurney, exhausted, shivering, realizing with a cold clarity that for the first time in his life, wealth had no power over mortality. He had controlled markets, crushed competitors, dictated outcomes, but none of that mattered here. None of that could save a child's life. In that hospital hallway, amidst the hum of machines and the quiet murmurs of paramedics, he felt the weight of his own fallibility. For decades, he had believed that power was protection, that control was survival, that wealth was security. But here, in the sterile white hall, drenched and shaking, he understood something deeper. He realized how close he had come to becoming the villain in this child's story, the person who could have let pride outweigh compassion, and almost did. The boy stirred. A tiny flutter of eyelashes, a shallow breath. His small hand twitched, and then he opened his eyes. Clear, wide, trusting eyes. He looked up at the millionaire, not with anger, not with fear, not with confusion, a child abandoned, but with trust, pure, fragile trust. The sight broke him completely. The tears came without warning, falling freely down his cheeks, warm against the chill of his skin, mixing with snow and sweat. He had protected himself in the world for years, built walls around his heart that no one could penetrate. And yet here, in a single quiet moment, a child's gaze had undone all of it. He wrapped the boy gently in a blanket, careful not to crush him, careful not to let the fear return. He whispered softly, words he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. "It's okay. You're safe now. I've got you." The boy's small hand gripped his coat, the gesture so simple, so human. It rooted him in a reality he had almost ignored. That life was fragile and that compassion, not power, was a measure of humanity. Every instinct he had relied on, pride, control, detachment, had been useless. Every calculation he had made, every deal, every negotiation, every empire he had built could not hold a child's heart safe. Only one thing could. Only one choice mattered. And he had made it. The paramedics continued their work, moving with calm urgency, but he barely noticed him anymore. His eyes stayed on the boy, tracing every breath, every flicker of movement, memorizing the trust that had been granted to him. And as he sat there, shivering, soaked, broken in the best way, he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to before. Power and wealth could buy comfort, could buy luxury, could buy fear and respect, but they could not buy dignity. They could not buy life, and they could never buy the simple, raw human connection that now held him captive. He realized that he had been blind for too long. He had spent his life protecting himself, defending walls, controlling everything he could, and ignoring the world outside his gates. But here was proof of a truth he could no longer deny. That small acts, moments of courage, moments of compassion, mattered more than everything he had chased for decades. That one moment, one choice, one rush into a storm, had saved a life. And it had saved something in him too. A heart he thought was too hardened to feel, a man he thought too powerful to be vulnerable. The boy's eyes met his again. A small, shaky smile. A flutter of trust that said everything words could not. He felt it deep in his chest, sharp and warm. And he knew, finally, that this moment, these minutes, the life of a small, abandoned child, had rewritten everything he had ever believed about himself, about power, about what truly mattered. He had failed once, in hesitation, in pride, but he had acted, and that action, born of instinct and humanity, had transformed him in ways money never could. The storm had broken outside, but inside, something more profound had broken open, a door within him that he had long thought sealed. He would never see life the same way again. Not after this. Not after the trust of a child had reminded him that humanity is measured not by wealth or walls, but by the courage to act when it matters most. And as he held the boy, wrapped in warmth at last, he whispered again, softly, almost to himself, "I will never let pride win over compassion again." The world outside was still cold. The snow still fell. But inside, for the first time in years, he felt something warmer than any mansion or fortune could ever offer. The undeniable, raw power of choosing right when it mattered most. The boy survived. He clung to life like a fragile flame in the cold, and when he finally opened his eyes fully, blinking against the harsh hospital lights, the first thing he saw was not a doctor, not a nurse, not a parent, but a man who had almost let pride destroy him. The millionaire sat beside the bed, his coat dripping with snow, his hands still trembling from that night. But he didn't move away. He didn't look away. He stayed, silently willing the child to know that someone had chosen him, that someone had decided his life mattered more than image, more than wealth, more than comfort. The boy's small hand, weak and pale, brushed against the billionaire's sleeve. It was tentative, hesitant, but it was trust, and that trust broke the man entirely. The realization hit him slowly, painfully, like a tide rolling over jagged rocks. He had spent decades building empires, wielding power, crushing opponents, protecting himself, mastering control. But the truth, the raw truth, was this: none of it had prepared him for humanity. None of it had taught him what mattered when a child's life hung in the balance. The boy had survived, yes, but the real survival was something deeper. The survival of a heart he thought long dead. The survival of empathy, of moral courage, of the quiet, terrifying, beautiful awareness that he could do something right, finally, when it mattered most. It was not just a child who had been invisible. The man realized this as he learned the story. The boy and his mother had been walking to the margins of the city, unnoticed, forgotten, displaced from the shelter that had been their only refuge, closed without warning. They were not characters in a story, not subject of attention or charity, not newsworthy enough for public sympathy. They were statistics, invisible numbers in the municipal records. And yet, they were human, fully human, full of hope, fear, and dreams, just like anyone else. The thought that he had ignored them, he, a man who prided himself on seeing every opportunity, every problem, every risk, was unbearable. In that moment, the billionaire decided he would do more than repair the immediate harm. He would change the way he lived, the way he saw the world, the way he wielded his power. He funded emergency shelters across the city, opening doors that had long been closed to the vulnerable, the cold, the hungry, the overlooked. And he didn't stop there. During harsh winter nights, he opened the gates of his own estate to anyone who needed warmth, blankets, food. The staff watched in stunned silence as a man who had always been untouchable, unapproachable, suddenly moved with urgency and care toward the powerless. He personally visited the boy and his mother, sitting with them, speaking softly, apologizing not with words alone, but with deeds, deeds that carried weight far greater than any contract or deal he had ever signed. Weeks later, the media arrived, cameras flashing, microphones poised, the city waiting to hear his explanation. He stood at the podium, tall, composed, but with an unfamiliar vulnerability in his voice. "I almost let pride cost a child his life," he said quietly, letting the words hang in the room. Wealth means nothing if your heart is bankrupt. There was a pause, a silence, so heavy it seemed to press against every chest in the audience. Employees, once fearful, now sat forward, seeing not a titan of industry, but a man who had stumbled and chosen to rise differently. The cameras captured the subtle glisten of tears in the eyes of listeners, in colleagues, in viewers who would later replay the moment endlessly. It was not spectacle. It was confession. It was transformation. It was a quiet admission that money, power, control, none of it mattered if it was wielded without humanity. The boy and his mother appeared at the edges of the crowd, faces tentative, smiling faintly, watching as a man who had once ignored them now built a life that included them, that protected them, that saw them. And in their eyes he saw the reflection of a truth he could no longer escape. Human dignity is priceless, and the courage to act when it is at risk is worth more than any fortune. It was a moral reckoning that reshaped his entire identity. The empire, the titles, the influence, they were still there, yes, but they were no longer the measure of his life. Compassion, action, integrity, and recognition of the humanity in others became the pillars of his existence. He realized that his staff, too, were changed. Those who had obeyed him without question now followed him with a sense of purpose, inspired not by fear, but by witnessing courage and humanity in action. The city, the community, the media, they all watched, and slowly, perception shifted. He was no longer simply a man who built wealth. He was a man who had learned, at the most critical moment, that power is not defined by dominance but by responsibility, that influence is not measured by fear but by empathy, that life is not preserved by walls but by choice. In the quiet of his mansion later that evening, after the press conference, he walked through the halls differently. The marble floor seemed softer, the air lighter. He thought of the snowstorm, of the boy's frozen hands, of the fleeting second that had separated life from death. He thought of his own heart, how it had been hardened by success, isolation, and pride. And he understood now that survival was never about money. Survival was about choices. Survival was about courage, about stepping into discomfort, about placing the vulnerable above your own image, about knowing that the weight of compassion is heavier than gold, but richer in ways you cannot measure. He returned to the hospital later that night to check on the boy. The child slept, pale but strong, the small chest rising and falling steadily. The mother's eyes met his, cautious but grateful. Words were unnecessary. Apologies had already been made in deeds, in actions, in the very choice to act rather than hesitate. And as he watched them, a quiet resolution settled in him. He would never again let pride outweigh the needs of another. He would never again let ego dictate the course of life when a heartbeat depended on action. That night, a man who had known only control, only calculation, only the illusion of safety, discovered the deepest form of wealth, a heart willing to see, willing to act, willing to care. By the time he left the hospital, the city slept under a blanket of fresh snow, unaware of the transformation that had occurred within one man. Yet in quiet corners, lives had already shifted, shelters opened, families protected, trust restored. And in the eyes of a small boy and his mother, a new reality had been built, one where dignity, compassion, and humanity were visible, tangible, actionable. And in that realization, the billionaire understood the truth that would remain with him forever. Sometimes, the greatest fortune a person can build is not in towers, not in money, not in influence, but in the second chance to choose right, to do what is good, to place the powerless before oneself. He looked at the boy once more, sleeping peacefully, and whispered softly, almost a prayer, "I will never forget this. I will never forget you." And for the first time, he understood fully that the moment a powerful man chooses compassion over ego is the moment the world becomes a little more human. It was not wealth that saved the child. It was the courage of a heart rebuilt. And that night, the lesson spread quietly, like light through storm clouds. Dignity, respect, and humanity are the truest measure of a life well lived.